So Rob, is it okay with you if I go ahead and start? Okay. Before we officially start, I wanted to mention to those of you who may have seen Professor Wanda Korn's presentation 2 weeks ago, and especially for those of you who may not have seen it, there's a wonderful write-up in today's Stanford report, yesterday's Stanford report on the back. So be sure to check that out. And the talks are posted on the CTL website, although I doubt Wanda's is up quite yet. But I just wanted to let you know that. And I'm Michelle Marinkovich, Associate Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education and Director of CTL. And thank you so much for being here in what is the final presentation in the 2005-06 award-winning Teachers on Teaching. And since it is the last one before we start up again next fall, I'm particularly pleased that Geological and Environmental Sciences Professor Rob Dunbar, who, as I'll explain in a minute, is a member of the CTL extended family, is presenting today on teaching outside the walls. Now, even more than usual, it's difficult with speakers in this series, but especially so today, given how broad Rob's interests are and how amazing his accomplishments are, to try to give a brief introduction that nonetheless does justice. In fact, just to list Rob's major titles, the Victoria P. and Roger V. Sant Director of the Earth Systems Program, the J. Frederick and Elizabeth B. Weintz University Fellow, in undergraduate education, Director of the Stanford University Stable Isotope Lab, Senior Fellow of the Freeman Spoley Institute for International Studies, and Senior Fellow in the Institute for the Environment, takes, as you've just seen, a little bit of time. But let me try to give you some sense of the man as well as the scientist and the teacher. Rob received his BS in geology in 1975 with special honors from the University of Texas, Austin, then went on to complete his PhD in oceanography at the University of California, San Diego in 1981. After teaching at UCSD as a TA, lecturer, and acting assistant professor, Rob then moved to Rice University, where he rose from assistant to full professor. In 1997, to our great good fortune, he was persuaded to come to Stanford. And hopefully this is where he will continue to stay. As somebody studying climate change, marine science, and environmental policy, Rob has chosen to work in fields that are usually not overlapping, Antarctica and the tropics, though in his studies they come together quite powerfully. He is also focused on not just one, but several approaches to paleoclimatology and paleoecology, using chemical, isotopic, and morphological measurements in his research. In spite of the challenge of these multiple literatures and techniques, or perhaps because of them, Rob has amassed a staggering research output. Over 150 publications in such prestigious venues as Nature, Science, the Journal of Geophysical Research, and my favorite, Paleogeography, Paleoclimatology, Paleoecology, known affectionately as Paleo. In support of this work, he has received almost 40 research grants from NSF and NOAA, among others, just since 1994. But Rob is here to talk to us about teaching, and it's a tribute to his commitment to students that on his website, replete with his publications and research grants, as we have seen, He states that, quote, the most meaningful honor, unquote, he has ever received is his J. Frederick and Elizabeth B. Weintz University Fellowship in Undergraduate Education, given in recognition of mentoring and teaching of undergraduates. Just how seriously he takes these responsibilities is very apparent from his website and CV, where his students' publications and achievements rank along with his own. Before I turn things over to Rob, however, I have to mention two last things. His is the only faculty webpage I have uncovered so far that has a picture not just of Rob, but of his beloved golden retriever, Hatch. Personally, I consider a love of dogs right up there with a love of undergraduates, as any of you who know me will have guessed. And as I mentioned in the beginning, Rob is a highly esteemed member of the CTL extended family, since his wife is our own amazing Senior Associate Director for Science and Engineering, Robin Wright Dunbar. About whom we have just learned something new. And now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to our series Professor Rob Dunbar.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Michelle. And Rebecca, could you kill that white toggle switch behind? Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks everybody for coming. And thanks for that introduction. I guess you might think now that I'm a ringer, since Robin and I are married and she works for CTL, but it's kind of funny, there's certain things you can't do with your spouse. Like, you should never try to hang wallpaper with your spouse. It's an instant path to divorce, and we actually talk less than you might imagine about the whole pedagogy of teaching. But I have to say, sometimes when I'm really stuck, and I've talked to my grad students, what do I do about kicking this class up and we can't work it out finally, then I'll go to Robin. I should probably turn to her first, right? But whenever I do that, in the extremity of a disaster, impending disaster in a class, she always kind of comes out with something that's totally new, and I give it a shot. And I'll describe a couple of those things here today. It is true. I was greatly honored by that teaching fellowship, in part, I think, because it was such a surprise. I mean, I really do love teaching. I wouldn't be working at a university otherwise. It's right up there with kind of scientific discovery as, the two most important things that motivate me. But that being said, I never would have thought of myself as like an outstanding teacher. I thought I was doing okay with it, and I try to do a good job, but I really was quite surprised by that, and I'm very appreciative of it. It's funny, since I got that fellowship, I've actually started to read articles about how you teach and pay more attention to it so that I'm not found out to be a fraud, Okay, I'm going to walk you through a couple of things here. This is very informal, and there's lots of food over here and sodas, and it's fine with me if you get up move over and grab a cookie or an apple. One of the keys to teaching is food, I've learned over the years that if students are doing something with their mouth, they cannot fall asleep, right? So if people are starting to nod off in class, you can have them chew some gum, talk to each other, kiss, eat something, whatever, but they cannot fall asleep if they're doing something with their mouth. And so go ahead and grab some food if you'd like, and also stop me if something comes up that you want to hear about at the time. Now, this is one of the classes I've been teaching the last few years. In fact, I think it might have been this group that in part nominated me for this award. And this was a class that ran through the fall quarter. We really just had this one field trip. The class was on polar exploration. I think Phil Farrell's son was out with us this time. And we had this overnight field trip, dog sledding, camping in the snow up in the Sierras. And it turned out it was a weekend with one of the worst storms, on record. So we get up here, 40 and 50 knot winds, and some of the smaller students were being blown off to the side. Nobody could see each other. I thought, my God, we're going to lose someone. And I was talking to Gary about this. I mean, field trips are getting a little bit harder to run now in some of the more exotic locations. But the fact is, I brought them all back alive, and they felt so happy about this. That was their final exam, was to survive a night under polar conditions. Okay, this is a shot of my start at teaching in the field. My very first year as a graduate student. My advisor, this man here, took me out on this cruise, and he decided to bring 4 undergraduate students along from UCSD. And he didn't really know exactly what he was going to do with them, but it seemed like a good idea, and so he said, Rob, you're my grad student. You're in charge of these 4 students for 6 weeks. And that was it. No training, no preparation. I couldn't even get him to sit down with me and talk about what they might do. But it worked out. And I showed this picture earlier in the day. Everybody was thinking this must be me over here, but that's actually me right there. And the funny thing is, you know, this is in the tropical ocean, the equatorial Pacific, and I had already cut my hair. This is my tropical haircut. And I used to wear this mule's tooth around my neck to annoy my mother, and it was very effective. Anyway, so I learned a lot of things on that trip, and it kind of launched me into this notion that as often as I could, I wanted to teach in the field. So